All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me here this evening at another episode of Steve Pett Reads. So this evening, we finished our Christian book, our first Christian book series, first book in that series on this last Wednesday. That was Being Christian by Rowan Williams. If you have not had a chance to see that, I will drop a link to the playlist with all 4 of those episodes into the chat right now. So this week we will be reading We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I was originally planning on this being 2 episodes, so tonight and this coming Wednesday. However, after taking another look at the book, I've read the book before, but it's been a little bit. After taking another look at the book over the past couple days, I don't actually think it's quite long enough to do in 2 episodes, so we will be doing it in just 1 episode, and then we'll have our next Christian book after this coming Wednesday. So today is the first episode of our social book series, and again, if you let me just kind of put this up on screen here. This, just here. Oops. There it is. This is the book we will be reading this evening. We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. It's a very good book. I highly recommend it. And so let's go ahead and get the way these episodes work is I read either a section or, like I said, in this case, we'll just read the whole thing. And then at the end, we try and have a discussion about it through the chat. So if you are with us, please stay with us till the end, and you can give your thoughts in the chat, or give your thoughts in the chat along the way, so that we can discuss it at the end. So let's go ahead and get started. Okoloma was one of my greatest childhood friends. He lived on my street and looked after me like a big brother. If I liked a boy, I would ask Okoloma's opinion. Okoloma was funny and intelligent and wore cowboy boots that were pointy at the tips. In December 2005, in a plane crash in southern Nigeria, Okoloma died. It is still hard for me to put into words how I felt. Okoloma was a person I could argue with, laugh with, and truly talk to. He was also the first person to call me a feminist. I was about 14. We were in his house, arguing, both of us bristling with half-baked knowledge from the books we had read. I don't remember what this particular argument was about, but I remember that as I argued and argued, Okoloma looked at me and said, "You know, you're a feminist." It was not a compliment. I could tell from the tone. It's the same tone that you would use with a person when you tell them you're a supporter of terrorism. I did not know exactly what this word feminist meant, and I did not want Okoloma to know that I didn't know, so I brushed it aside and continued to argue. The first thing I planned to do when I got home was look up the word in the dictionary. Now fast forward to some years later. In 2003, I wrote a novel called Purple Hibiscus, about a man who, among other things, beats his wife, and whose story doesn't end too well. While I was promoting the novel in Nigeria, a journalist, a nice, well-meaning man, told me he wanted to advise me. Nigerians, as you might know, are very quick to give unsolicited advice. He told me that people were saying my novel was feminist, and his advice to me, he was shaking his head sadly as he spoke, was that I should never call myself a feminist, since feminists are women who are unhappy because they cannot find husbands. So I decided to call myself a happy feminist. Then an academic, a Nigerian woman, told me that feminism was not our culture, that feminism was un-African, and I was only calling myself a feminist because I had been influenced by Western books, which amused me because much of my early reading was decidedly unfeminist. I must have read every single Mills and Boon romance published before I was 16. And each time I try to read those books called classic feminist texts, I get bored, and I struggle to finish them. Anyway, since feminism was an un-African thing, I decided, well, now I would call myself a happy African feminist. Then a dear friend told me that calling myself a feminist meant that I hated men. So I decided I would now be a happy African feminist who does not hate men. At some point, I was a happy African feminist who does not hate men and who likes to wear lip gloss and high heels for herself and not for men. Of course, much of this was tongue-in-cheek, but what it shows is how that word feminist is so heavy with baggage, negative baggage. You hate men, you hate bras, you hate African culture, you think women should always be in charge, you don't wear makeup, you don't shave, you're always angry, you don't have a sense of humor, you don't use deodorant. Now here's a story from my childhood. When I was in primary school in Nsukka, a university town in southeastern Nigeria, my teacher said at the beginning of term that she would give the class a test, and whoever got the highest score would be the class monitor. Class monitor was a big deal. If you were class monitor, you would write down the names of noisemakers each day, which was heady enough power on its own, but my teacher would also give you a cane to hold in your hand while you walked around and patrolled the class for noisemakers. Of course, you were not allowed to actually use the cane, but it was still an exciting prospect for the 9-year-old me. I very much wanted to be class monitor. And I got the highest score on the test. Then, to my surprise, my teacher said the monitor had to be a boy. She had forgotten to make that clear earlier. She assumed that it was obvious. A boy had the second highest score on the test, and he would be monitor. What was even more interesting is that this boy was a sweet, gentle soul who had no interest in patrolling the class with a stick, while I was full of ambition to do so. But I was female, and he was male, and he became class monitor. I've never forgotten that incident. If we do something over and over again, it becomes normal. If we see the same thing over and over again, it becomes normal. If only boys are made class monitor, then at some point we will all think, even if unconsciously, that the class monitor has to be a boy. If we keep seeing only men as heads of corporations, it begins to seem natural that only men should be heads of corporations. I often make the mistake of thinking that something that is obvious to me is just as obvious to everyone else. Take my dear friend Lewis, who is a brilliant, progressive man. We would have conversations, and he would tell me, "I don't see what you mean by things being different and harder for women. Maybe it was so in the past, but not now. Everything is fine now for women." I didn't understand how Lewis could not see what seemed so evident. I love being back home in Nigeria and spend much of my time there in Lagos, the largest city and commercial hub of the country. Sometimes in the evenings, when the heat goes down and the city has a slower pace, I go out with friends and family to restaurants or cafes. On one of those evenings, Lewis and I were out with friends. There is a wonderful fixture in Lagos, a sprinkling of energetic young men who hang around outside certain establishments and very dramatically help you park your car. Lagos is a metropolis of almost 20 million people, with more energy than London, more entrepreneurial spirit than New York. And so people come up with all sorts of ways to make a living. As in most big cities, finding parking in the evenings can be difficult, so these young men make a business out of finding spots, and even when there are spots available, of guiding you into yours with much gesticulating and promising to look after your car until you get back. I was impressed with the particular theatrics of the man who found us a parking spot that evening, and so as we were leaving, I decided to give him a tip. I opened my bag, put my hand inside my bag to get my money, and I gave it to the man. And he, this man who was happy and grateful, took the money from me, then looked across at Louis and said, "Thank you, sir." Louis looked at me, surprised, and asked, "Why is he thanking me? I didn't give him the money." Then I saw realization dawn on Louis's face. The man believed that whatever money I had ultimately must come from Louis because Louis is a man. Men and women are different. We have different hormones and different sexual organs and different biological abilities. Women can have babies and men cannot. Men have more testosterone and are, in general, physically stronger than women. There are slightly more women than men in the world. 52% of the world's population is female, but most of the positions of power and prestige are occupied by men. The late Kenyan Nobel Peace Laureate Wangari Maathai put it simply and well when she said, "The higher you go, the fewer women there are." In the recent U.S. elections, we kept hearing of the Lilly Ledbetter Law, and if we go beyond that nicely alliterative name, it was really about this. In the U.S., a man and a woman are doing the same job, with the same qualifications, and the man is paid more because he is a man. So in a literal way, men rule the world. This made sense 1,000 years ago, because human beings lived then in a world in which physical strength was the most important attribute for survival. The physically stronger person was more likely to lead, and men in general are physically stronger, although there are of course many exceptions. Today we live in a vastly different world. The person more qualified to lead is not the physically stronger person. It is the more intelligent, the more knowledgeable, the more creative, the more innovative, and there are no hormones for those attributes. A man is as likely as a woman to be intelligent, innovative, and creative. We have evolved, but our ideas of gender have not evolved very much. Not long ago, I walked into the lobby of one of the very best Nigerian hotels, and a guard at the entrance stopped me and asked me annoying questions. What was the name and room of the person I was visiting? Did I know this person? Could I prove that I was a hotel guest by showing him my key card? Because the automatic assumption is that a Nigerian female walking into a hotel alone is a sex worker. Because a Nigerian female alone cannot possibly be a guest paying for her own room. A man who walks into the same hotel is not harassed. The assumption is that he is there for something legitimate. Why, by the way, do those hotels not focus on the demand for sex workers instead of the ostensible supply? In Lagos, I cannot go alone into many reputable clubs and bars. They just don't let you in if you are a woman alone. You must be accompanied by a man. And so I have male friends who arrive at clubs and end up going in with their arms linked with those of a complete stranger, because that complete stranger, a woman, out on her own, had no choice but to ask for help to get into the club. Each time I walk into a Nigerian restaurant with a man, the waiter greets the man and ignores me. The waiters are products of a society that has taught them that men are more important than women. And I know that they don't intend harm, but it is one thing to know something intellectually, and quite another to feel it emotionally. Each time they ignore me, I feel invisible. I feel upset. I want to tell them that I am just as human as the man, just as worthy of acknowledgement. These are little things, but sometimes it is the little things that sting the most. Not long ago, I wrote an article about being young and female in Lagos, and an acquaintance told me that it was an angry article, and I should not have made it so angry. But I was unapologetic. Of course it was angry. Gender as it functions today is a grave injustice. I am angry. We should all be angry. Anger has a long history of bringing about positive change, but I am also hopeful because I believe deeply in the ability of human beings to remake themselves for the better. But back to anger. I heard the caution in the acquaintance's tone, and I knew that the comment was as much about the article as it was about my character. Anger, the tone said, is particularly not good for a woman. If you are a woman, you are not supposed to express anger because it is threatening. I have a friend, an American woman, who took over a managerial position from a man. Her predecessor had been considered a tough go-getter. He was blunt and hard-charging, and was particularly strict about the signing of timesheets. She took on her new job and imagined herself equally tough, but perhaps a little kinder than him. He didn't always realize that people had families, she said, and she did. Only weeks into her job, she disciplined an employee about a forgery on a timesheet, just as her predecessor would have done. The employee then complained to top management about her style. She was aggressive, difficult to work with, the employee said. Other employees agreed. One said they had expected that she would bring a woman's touch to her job, but she hadn't. It didn't occur to any of them that she was doing the same thing for which a man had been praised. I have another friend, also an American woman, who has a high-paying job in advertising. She's one of 2 women in her team. Once at a meeting, she said she had felt slighted by her boss. Who had ignored her comments, and then praised something similar when it came from a man. She wanted to speak up, to challenge her boss, but she didn't. Instead, after the meeting, she went to the bathroom and cried, then called me to vent about it. She didn't want to speak up because she didn't want to seem aggressive. She let her resentments simmer. What struck me with her and with many other female American friends I have is how invested they are in being liked. How they have been raised to believe that their being likable is very important, and that this likable trait is a specific thing. And that specific thing does not include showing anger or being aggressive or disagreeing too loudly. We spend too much time teaching girls to worry about what boys think of them, but the reverse is not the case. We don't teach boys to care about being likable. We spend too much time telling girls that they cannot be angry or aggressive or tough, which is bad enough. But then we turn around and either praise or excuse men for the same reasons. All over the world, there are so many magazine articles and books telling women what to do, how to be and not to be in order to attract or please men. There are far fewer guides for men about pleasing women. I teach a writing workshop in Lagos, and one of the participants, a young woman, told me that a friend had told her not to listen to my feminist talk. Otherwise, she would absorb ideas that would destroy her marriage. This is a threat, the destruction of a marriage, the possibility of not having a marriage at all, that in our society is much more likely to be used against a woman than against a man. Gender matters everywhere in the world, and I would like today to ask that we should begin to dream about and plan for a different world, a fairer world, a world of happier men and happier women who are truer to themselves. And this is how to start. We must raise our daughters differently. We must also raise our sons differently. We do a great disservice to boys and how we raise them. We stifle the humanity of boys. We define masculinity in a very narrow way. Masculinity is a hard, small cage, and we put boys inside this cage. We teach boys to be afraid of fear, of weakness, of vulnerability. We teach them to mask their true selves, because they have to be, in Nigerian speak, a hard man. In secondary school, a boy and a girl go out, both of them teenagers with meager pocket money. Yet the boy is expected to pay the bills, always, to prove his masculinity. And we wonder why boys are more likely to steal money from their parents. What if both boys and girls were raised not to link masculinity and money? What if their attitude was not the boy has to pay, but rather whoever has more should pay? Of course, because of their historical advantage, it is mostly men who will have more today. But if we start raising children differently, then in 50 years, in 100 years, boys will no longer have the pressure of proving their masculinity by material means. But by far the worst thing we do to males, by making them feel they have to be hard, is that we leave them with very fragile egos. The harder a man feels compelled to be, the weaker his ego is. And then we do a much greater disservice to girls because we raise them to cater to the fragile egos of males. We teach girls to shrink themselves, to make themselves smaller. We say to girls, you can have ambition, but not too much. You should aim to be successful, but not too successful. Otherwise, you will threaten the man. If you are the breadwinner in your relationship with a man, pretend that you are not, especially in public. Otherwise, you will emasculate him. But what if we question the very premise itself? Why should a woman's success be a threat to a man? What if we decide to simply dispose of that word? And I don't know if there is an English word I dislike more than this: emasculation. A Nigerian acquaintance once asked me if I was worried that men would be intimidated by me. I was not worried at all. It had not even occurred to me to be worried, because a man who would be intimidated by me is exactly the kind of man I would have no interest in. Still, I was struck by this. Because I am female, I am expected to aspire to marriage. I am expected to make my life choices always keeping in mind that marriage is the most important. Marriage can be a good thing, a source of joy, love, and mutual support. But why do we teach girls to aspire to marriage, yet we don't teach boys to do the same? I know a Nigerian woman who decided to sell her house because she didn't want to intimidate a man who might want to marry her. I know an unmarried woman in Nigeria who, when she goes to conferences, wears a wedding ring because she wants her colleagues to, according to her, give her respect. The sadness in this is that a wedding ring will indeed automatically make her seem worthy of respect, while not wearing a wedding ring would make her easily dismissible, and this is in a modern workplace. I know young women who are under so much pressure from family, from friends, even from work, to get married, that they are pushed to make terrible choices. Our society teaches a woman at a certain age who is unmarried to see it as a deep, personal failure, while a man at a certain age who is unmarried has not quite come around to making his pick. It is easy to say, but women can just say no to all this. But the reality is more difficult, more complex. We are all social beings. We internalize ideas from our socialization. Even the language we use illustrates this. The language of marriage is often a language of ownership, not a language of partnership. We use the word respect for something a woman shows a man, but not often for something a man shows a woman. Both men and women will say, "I did it for peace in my marriage." When men say it, it is usually about something they should not be doing anyway, something they say to their friends in a fondly exasperated way, something that ultimately proves to them their masculinity. "Oh, my wife said I can't go to clubs every night, so now, for peace in my marriage, I go only on weekends." When women say, "I did it for peace in my marriage," it is usually because they have given up a job, a career goal, a dream. We teach females that in relationships, compromise is what a woman is more likely to do. We raise girls to see each other as competitors, not for jobs or accomplishments, which in my opinion can be a good thing, but for the attention of men. We teach girls that they cannot be sexual beings in the same way boys are. If we have sons, we don't mind knowing about their girlfriends, but our daughters' boyfriends? God forbid. But we of course expect them to bring home the perfect man for marriage when the time is right. We police girls. We praise girls for virginity, but we don't praise boys for virginity. And it makes me wonder how exactly this is supposed to work out, since the loss of virginity is a process that generally involves two people of opposite genders. Recently, a young woman was gang raped in a university in Nigeria, and the response of many young Nigerians, both male and female, was something like this. Yes, rape is wrong, but what is a girl doing in a room with 4 boys? Let us, if we can, forget the horrible inhumanity of that response. These Nigerians have been raised to think of women as inherently guilty, and they have been raised to expect so little of men that the idea of men as savage beings with no self-control is somehow acceptable. We teach girls shame. Close your legs, cover yourself. We make them feel as though by being born female, they are already guilty of something. And so girls who grow up to be women who cannot say they have desire, who silence themselves, who cannot say what they truly think, who have turned pretense into an art form. I know a woman who hates domestic work, but she pretends that she likes it because she has been taught that to be good wife material, she has to be, to use that Nigerian word, homely. And when she got married and her husband's family began to complain that she had changed, actually, she had not changed. She just got tired of pretending to be what she was not. The problem with gender is that it describes how we should be rather than recognizing how we are. Imagine how much happier we would be, how much freer to be our true individual selves if we didn't have the weight of gender expectations. Boys and girls are undeniably different biologically, but socialization exaggerates the differences and then starts a self-fulfilling process. Take cooking, for example. Today, women in general are more likely to do housework than men, cooking and cleaning. But why is that? Is it because women are born with a cooking gene, or because over the years they have been socialized to see cooking as their role? I was going to say that perhaps women are born with a cooking gene until I remembered that the majority of famous cooks in the world who are given the fancy title of chef are men. I used to look at my grandmother, a brilliant woman, and wonder what she would have been if she'd had the same opportunities as men during her youth. Today, there are more opportunities for women than there were during my grandmother's time because of changes in policy and law, which are very important. But what matters even more is our attitude, our mindset. What if in raising children we focus on ability instead of gender? What if we focus on interest instead of gender? I know a family who has a son and a daughter a year apart in age. both brilliant at school. When the boy is hungry, the parents say to the girl, "Go and cook Indomie noodles for your brother." The girl doesn't like to cook Indomie noodles, but she is a girl and she has to. What if the parents from the beginning taught both children to cook them? Cooking, by the way, is a useful and practical life skill for a boy to have. I've never thought it made much sense to leave such a crucial thing, the ability to nourish oneself, in the hands of others. I know a woman who has the same degree and the same job as her husband, but when they get back from work, she does most of the housework, which is true for many marriages. But what struck me was that whenever he changed the baby's nappy, she said, "Thank you" to him. What if she saw it as something normal and natural that he should help care for his child? I am trying to unlearn many lessons of gender I internalized while growing up, but I sometimes still feel vulnerable in the face of gender expectations. The first time I taught a writing class in graduate school, I was worried. Not about the teaching material. I was well prepared, and I was teaching what I enjoyed. Instead, I was worried about what to wear. I wanted to be taken seriously. I knew that because I was female, I would automatically have to prove my worth. And I was worried that if I looked too feminine, I would not be taken seriously. I really wanted to wear my shiny lip gloss and my girly skirt, but I decided not to. I wore a very serious, very manly, and very ugly suit. The sad truth of the matter is that when it comes to appearance, we start off with men as the standard, as the norm. Many of us think that the less feminine a woman appears, the more likely she is to be taken seriously. A man going to a business meeting doesn't wonder about being taken seriously based on what he's wearing, but a woman does. I wish I had not worn that ugly suit that day. Had I then the confidence I have now to be myself, my students would have benefited even more from my teaching, because I would have been more comfortable and more fully and truly myself. I have chosen to no longer be apologetic for my femininity, and I want to be respected in all my femaleness, because I deserve to be. I like politics and history, and am happiest when having a good argument about ideas. I am girly. I am happily girly. I like high heels and trying on lipsticks. It's nice to be complimented by both men and women, although I have to be honest and say that I prefer the compliments of stylish women. But I often wear clothes that men don't like or don't understand. I wear them because I like them, and because I feel good in them. The male gaze as a shaper of my life's choices is largely incidental. Gender is not an easy conversation to have. It makes people uncomfortable, sometimes even irritable. Both men and women are resistant to talk about gender, or are quick to dismiss the problems of gender because thinking of changing the status quo is always uncomfortable. Some people ask, why the word feminist? Why not just say, you are a believer in human rights, or something like that? Because that would be dishonest. Feminism is, of course, part of human rights in general, but to choose to use the vague expression human rights is to deny the specific and particular problem of gender. It would be a way of pretending that it was not women who have for centuries been excluded. It would be a way of denying that the problem of gender targets women. That the problem was not about being human, but specifically about being a female human. For centuries, the world divided human beings into two groups and then proceeded to exclude and oppress one group. It is only fair that the solution to the problem should acknowledge that. Some men feel threatened by the idea of feminism. This comes, I think, from the insecurity triggered by how boys are brought up, how their sense of self-worth is diminished if they are not naturally in charge as men. Other men might respond by saying, okay, this is interesting, but I don't think like that. I don't even think about gender. Maybe not. And that is not part of the problem, that many men do not actively think about gender or notice gender. That many men say, like my friend Lewis did, that things might have been bad in the past, but everything is fine now, and that many men do nothing to change it. If you are a man and you walk into a restaurant and the waiter greets just you, does it occur to you to ask the waiter, why have you not greeted her? Men need to speak out in all of these ostensibly small situations, because gender can be uncomfortable. There are easy ways to close this conversation. Some people will bring up evolutionary biology and apes, how female apes bow to male apes, that sort of thing. But the point is this: we are not apes. Apes also live in trees and eat earthworms. We do not. Some people will say, well, poor men also have a hard time. And they do. But that is not what this conversation is about. Gender and class are different. Poor men still have the privileges of being men, even if they do not have the privileges of being wealthy. I learned a lot about systems of oppression and how they can be blind to one another by talking to black men. I was once again talking about gender, and a man said to me, why does it have to be you as a woman? Why not you as a human being? This type of question is a way of silencing a person's specific experiences. Of course I'm a human being, but there are particular things that happen to me in this world because I am a woman. This same man, by the way, would often talk about his experience as a black man, to which I should probably have responded, why not your experiences as a man or as a human being? Why a black man? So no, this conversation is about gender. Some people will say, oh, but women have the real power, bottom power. This is a Nigerian expression for a woman who uses her sexuality to get things from men. But bottom power is not power at all, because the woman with the bottom power is actually not powerful. She just has a good route to tap another person's power. And then what happens if the man is in a bad mood or sick or temporarily impotent? Some people will say a woman is subordinate to men because it's our culture. But culture is constantly changing. I have beautiful twin nieces who are 15. If they had been born 100 years ago, they would have been taken away and killed. Because 100 years ago, Igbo culture considered the birth of twins to be an evil omen. Today, that practice is unimaginable to all Igbo people. What is the point of culture? Culture functions ultimately to ensure the preservation and continuity of a people. In my family, I am the child who is most interested in the story of who we are, in ancestral lands, in our tradition. My brothers are not as interested as I am, but I cannot participate because Igbo culture privileges men, and only the male members of the extended family can attend the meetings where major family decisions are taken. So although I am the one who is most interested in these things, I cannot attend the meeting. I cannot have a formal say because I am female. Culture does not make people. People make culture. If it is true that the full humanity of women is not our culture, then we can and must make it our culture. I think very often of my friend Okoloma. May he and others who passed away in that Sosoliso crash continue to rest in peace. He will always be remembered by those of us who loved him, and he was right that day many years ago when he called me a feminist. I am a feminist. And when all those years ago I looked the word up in the dictionary, it said, feminist, a person who believes in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. My great-grandmother, from stories I've heard, was a feminist. She ran away from the house of the man she did not want to marry and married the man of her choice. She refused, protested, spoke up whenever she felt she was being deprived of land and access because she was female. She did not know that word feminist, but it doesn't mean she wasn't one. More of us should reclaim that word. The best feminist I know is my brother, Kine, who is also a kind, good-looking, and very masculine young man. My own definition of a feminist is a man or a woman who says, yes, there's a problem with gender as it is today, and we must fix it. We must do better. All of us, women and men, must do better. So that is the end of the book. So what I'd like to do is hopefully have a bit of a conversation about it. So if you have any thoughts you'd like to share, please feel free to type it into the chat on either YouTube or Twitch. I should be able to see it in either place. If you're able to watch this on YouTube or Twitch, but for whatever reason are not able to type into the chat, if you came to this from one of my Facebook posts, if you comment on those posts, I should be able to see it as well. So, do comment, anyone at all? I guess I'll make a few comments myself. There's a lot in here that I agree with. One or two things I can't say I identify with. Perhaps I was personally raised in a slightly different way than some others, and that's perfectly fine. I can't say I was specifically raised to be likable. I'm not sure that's the word, but I was raised to be polite and don't cause trouble and so forth. So I can't say how other men have been raised, but I can say my parents at least probably raised me to be likable to some extent. But she's right that throughout our culture, while we may not be quite as defined, it might not be quite as clear as in the culture in Nigeria, even in our culture here in America and throughout the Western world, there are still definitions of masculinity. And a lot of those definitions revolve around strength, whether that's physical or emotional. And that's not necessarily a healthy way to live. Like she said, everyone should, I would argue, not only should everyone be raised to learn how to cook, but perhaps everyone should be raised to be likable and not, need to be commanding or so forth. As far as the difference between men and women are seen, this is a fairly clear thing that any of us can see. I mean, I hate to use, strong language, but, generally in culture, how is it seen? A man who sleeps around with many women is a player, or, it's generally, to some extent, by many people admired, whereas a woman who sleeps around with many people is seen as, and I apologize for the use of the term, a slut or a whore or something of that nature, which of course is ridiculous. Whether or not you should sleep with many people is a different issue, but the point is that there is no reason why one should be held up and another should be denigrated for the same action. What I find quite remarkable in that particular fact is that in general our society outwardly suggests that all of us should be perhaps abstinent to some extent. That's the official line, in a lot of the United States, abstinence is the primary thing taught in sex ed, is, you don't want to get pregnant, you don't want to get sexually transmitted diseases. Abstinence until marriage is the way to go. And I find it quite interesting that even though officially speaking, outwardly, that abstinence is what is held up, it's just not the way society works. And so, as she said, the abstinence, the virginity, continues to be highly valued in women, but denigrated in men. And that is, again, it's the same thing. And I would say that everyone should have a choice. My opinion is that there are women who legitimately want and choose to be what we would call here in the United States stay-at-home mothers. And that is perfectly fine if that is what they choose. If that is how they want to be, that is fine. But equally so, as she said, this difference between men and women makes it looked down upon sometimes when men want to stay at home and be stay-at-home fathers. This is not good. Everyone should have their choice. Women should not be denigrated for wanting a career. Of course not. That's ridiculous. No more than a man should be denigrated for wanting a career, and neither should be denigrated for wanting to be stay-at-home parents. That's more choice about child rearing and the way you want to raise your child. Maybe you believe that having a stay-at-home parent is best. I'm neither arguing for or against that. I'm just saying that everyone should have the choice. But again, as she said, this difference in our cultures, even today in American culture, well, maybe not as strongly as it might have been 40 or 50 years ago, but even today, the idea of a stay-at-home mother is to some extent prized. The idea of a stay-at-home father, not so much. People look at them and think, oh, well, they might be lazy or something like that. Or women who want to go out and get a job, well, they're betraying their family. They're not good mothers. Of course, again, that is a ridiculous statement. And what Ms. Adichie points out here is that this is pervasive, not just in Nigeria. Like I said, some of the cultural things are much more clear, perhaps, in Nigerian culture than in American or Western culture. But the truth is that many of the same situations still exist. Many of the same attitudes still exist. She's totally right when she says that, there are all sorts of, books and magazines and whatever that tell women how to be attractive to men, or specifically perhaps to their boyfriends or fiancés or husbands. Never minding the fact that the kind of binary heterosexual world isn't exactly the world we live in anymore. There are those out there who are gay and bisexual and all these things, and these unequal ways that men and women are treated are possibly very much leading into I don't know how to put it exactly, perhaps reinforce the denigration of those people who are minorities in terms of gender identity or sexuality. All of these things are things that should be considered. There's not much in this book that I found personally to disagree with. The only thing I would disagree with is while the the bit about being taken seriously based on what you wear may be lesser pressure for men, I would argue that it's still there. I mean, if you are someone who likes dressing in t-shirts and jeans, if you show up to a major business meeting dressed that way, unless you're working for a surfboard company or something, it's probably not going to mean you're taken very seriously. So perhaps that is something else we can change. I mean, it's not really the conversation here, but perhaps, the way people like to express themselves should have greater freedom than it does at the moment. I mean, I tend to wear, people who know me can see that I very often wear long sleeve shirts. There's no particular reason that I do. I'm not covering up any tattoos or cuts or scars or anything. I just, that's just the way I prefer to dress. I tend to wear long sleeves and long pants or long trousers. And when I go to church, for example, I wear a tie. Not everyone in my church wears a tie. And there's no reason they necessarily should. It's just how you're comfortable. Personally, I quite like wearing suits. I haven't worn one in a while, but I like wearing suits. Not everyone does. And so you should be able to express yourself to some extent. But I would just say that that's the only thing perhaps in the book that I disagree with, is that while the specific experience that she is talking about is more rooted in gender, that I would argue that to some extent what you wear still will depend on how seriously you're taken will still depend partially on what you wear, even as a man. But admittedly, the difference is that you can dress in a feminine way that is very serious, but not be taken seriously because you're a woman dressing in a feminine way. So I have a comment here from a user here, Ministry of NUE Control, and if I pronounced that incorrectly, my deepest apologies. Say, one of the biggest things toxic masculinity taught me when I was young is it made me assume that there is only one way of being a man. Gender exploration aside, I would see men I cared about, looked up to, seen as less by their friends, as they were emotional and loving, and not these uncaring monoliths our society's media would push. Yeah, that's very much correct. I would say that it's kind of a slight tangent, but very related to what they say. It's not just about making sure we raise our children to know that all are equal, but the very idea of masculinity, of needing to be strong, of needing to be, it's not necessarily good, and it's not necessarily good psychologically or emotionally. The truth is that no matter who you are, you feel emotions. You have inner thoughts, you're upset. Not that I would blame this specifically on that culture, but it's always a possible side effect. It would be interesting to just to have a psychiatrist or psychologist perhaps comment on how that toxic masculinity, that idea of needing to be strong and so forth, perhaps feeds into the abuse that some men mete out to family, the abusive relationships. Now, I'm not saying that that's the sole cause or of anything, but I would imagine that to some extent that that toxic masculinity definitely, leads into that. Now, that is not to say that if you are the type of person who does not like to show emotion, that's a problem. There are men and women like that. But again, this goes down to, basic equality here in the way the men and women are seen is, there are women who are very similarly, not hard, maybe isn't the right word, but, they don't commonly like to show their emotion, in big ways out, they're very internal people, and some people are like that. And yet, a man who shows his emotion would be seen as girly or whatever, and opposite of that, a woman who doesn't show emotion is cold and frigid and a hard woman, as they said. All of this is, these are pervasive attitudes that even if you don't hold them, exist in the world. I think it's an important thing, and this carries over to the same thing with the Black Lives Matter movement and the common response that all lives matter. I saw that exact thing when she was talking about the man who said to her, well, why is it women's rights? Why isn't it human rights? It's the same thing. Why is it Black Lives Matter? Why not human lives matter? Well, of course all human lives matter. No person who supports Black Lives Matter believes that human lives do not matter. And no person who is a feminist believes that only women's rights are worth talking about. What they're saying is that there has been specific oppression and specific injustices to both women and to people of racial minorities, and failing to acknowledge that, failing to look into that and do our best to change our culture is just not, it's just a failure overall. Yes, all lives matter, but the point is that that's not the conversation we're having. That's exactly what she said when she said, of course all human rights matter, but this is a conversation about gender. That's the point. So I think she said it very well. She's very, she lays things out very well, very clearly. I definitely would recommend this book to anyone. If someone would like to think about it, I think it helps me personally. As she said, we all have different experiences, and sometimes it is hard, especially when you are, not that I'm trying to identify myself, but, white, male, and straight, I'm in the, the majority. I am in the power, and I can understand why people who are of that position, in that identity, feel threatened by some of these conversations, because the thing that you're tempted to say is, well, I feel powerless sometimes. I think everyone does, but sometimes you say to yourself, I feel powerless. Why should I worry about this? And I already feel powerless, and you want to make me even more powerless. You can understand why a lot of people can have those feelings. But the point is, we have to have the conversations. Being immediately offended, immediately shutting down the conversations doesn't help any of us. It doesn't help the conversation. It doesn't help us move past the place where we are. As I've said, in some of you have probably been watching my evening prayers that I do for St. Andrew's here, and one of the things I try to acknowledge is that when I pray for those suffering social injustice, when I pray for those who are oppressed, I am not specifically attacking my own country. I am not specifically saying that America is a, terrible and awful place. I am not ignoring the huge leaps forward, strides forward on these issues. I'm not ignoring any of that. But the point is, just because we've made a lot of progress towards the goal, we haven't reached the goal. Racism still exists. Misogyny still exists. And in many ways, in both cases, is pervasive throughout our culture. And that's a problem. And we have to acknowledge both of these. One can't deny that a woman, maybe a woman or a man in a park for some reason is threatened by a minority person, an African American or possibly a Middle Eastern person in an area they don't expect to see them. Now, is that person expressing some racism? Yes, but perhaps they're expressing the racism that unfortunately our society has ingrained into them. And that's a terrible thing to think about. But the fact is, we don't exist in vacuums. No one comes out of their mother, sorry for the image, no one comes out as a racist. No one comes out as misogynist. These are learned behaviors. Not all learning is someone standing up and telling you specifically this is the way it is. Sometimes it's just the pervasiveness of things in our culture. Like I said, and it's not good for men or women. The fact is that men and women are equal. They are both, this goes back to my personal religious beliefs, but the way I see it is they are both made by God. They are all children of God. All races, all genders, all sexualities are all the children of God and made in God's image. And they are equal and deserving of respect. And of course, people should be treated equally. I will say that some of the things that Ms. Adichie suggests would be hard for me. For example, the bit she talks about with her friend, going into a restaurant and the waiter seeming to be particularly sexist by ignoring the woman, and she specifically talks about walking in, but you get that situation a lot of times with when it comes to pay for a meal and you're having a combined check and the waiter just makes an assumption and gives the bill automatically to the man, and it's a pervasive thing. I would be honest, I would have trouble calling that behavior out. Now, that is not because I agree with the behavior. It is because I am generally I don't know how to put it, shy of confrontation. I don't generally try to start arguments or fights where they are. But perhaps, in the same way that books like this help me to try and examine my behavior and the world I live in, perhaps in the same way it is by calling out this behavior, I would suggest in as gentle and kind a way as possible. It is perhaps in calling out this behavior that we may help someone else to have that moment where they stop to examine the way they are, the way they live, the way they think, and the way that their society thinks. It's a conversation we have to have. And I don't know how else to put it. She's completely right. We have to do our best to raise our children in this, in ways that don't reinforce these stereotypes. Women do not have to be attractive or specifically likable to men. Men do not have to be the strong one, the breadwinner, the one in charge. And, I don't feel personally that I don't feel emasculated when I end up working underneath a woman. It doesn't bother me that much, but I know for a lot of people it does. It does bother them. For a lot of men, it's a problem when their manager or CEO or whoever, when the person that they answer to is a woman, and that is a problem. It's something that's so ingrained into a person by society that it is undoubtedly difficult to combat. You do what you can, but it's hard to change what you feel inside, even if you don't express it externally. I think this is a good book. If you would like to pick up a copy of this book, if you are on my YouTube channel, if you look down in the description of the video, you will find links to this book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, as well as if you're inclined to support independent bookstores, there's a link to this book's page on the Twig, which is an independent bookseller here in San Antonio. Also, if you would like more information about feminism or to donate money to work with, or to donate time and money to organizations, to feminist organizations, you will also find links in the description to the National Organization of Women, the Global Fund for Women, and the UN Women's Organization, who I remember a couple years ago ran a great campaign talking about why we should all, both men and women, be feminists. I believe they called the campaign the He for She campaign. I remember that a couple years ago. So there are links to those if you would like to either support those organizations or just find more information on feminism in general. There are links to all three of those organizations in the description. So we're wrapping up here. So our next book will be back to our Christian book series. So the two books that we are considering are these two books that should be showing up to either side of me right now. I think that worked. Over here we have Crazy Christians by Michael Curry, who is the current presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church here in the United States. And over here we have Being Disciples, who is written by Rowan Williams, who also wrote the book Being Christian that we just finished this last week. So if you, we're going to be reading one of these two books starting on Wednesday at 6 p.m. If you would like, if one or the other interests you specifically, I encourage you to either tell me in the chat now or leave a comment under the video. If you are part of that Facebook group for St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in San Antonio, there's actually a poll in the group, just asking your opinion on which you would rather. So if you are a part of that group, by all means, please vote in that poll. I think that's it, and I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up this evening. I hope you all got something out of this book. I myself got something out of this book. It's a very short book, but a very, in my opinion, very powerful book, and I strongly advise, I strongly would recommend it to anyone, because in the end we should all be feminists, because we are all equal, and the inequalities, the way our culture teaches men and women is detrimental to all of us. So I hope you all have a great evening. This may sound crazy to you if you're watching this on YouTube a few years down the road, but we are still in the middle of the pandemic, so please, I encourage you to remember to wear your masks and wash your hands. Thank you all, and have a great weekend.